This video was brought to you by General Tso's Chicken and Fried Rice. Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to a build recap video where I talk about lessons learned from doing my first water-cooled build. Since you saw my PC last, I haven't done very much to it besides add another fan to my 360mm radiator. I do have two more fans coming in the mail, one for a bottom intake and one for a top exhaust respectively, and I will be changing the airflow of this fan to intake. The side panel has a 200mm fan that I will be getting a fan grill for, so it doesn't really push up against these cables. Besides that, I mean, yes, there are at least 10 things I could have done differently with this build. I will be the first person to admit that, yes, I did make a few mistakes with choosing the components that I did. It's extremely easy to be on the outside looking in and be critical at the same time. But, you know, I did have to think outside of the box in doing a lot of the things that I did. And you do have to admit it did take quite a bit of skill to get everything everything to work the way it did with mounting the reservoir in the bay and having the tubing be such a tight squeeze and getting the right leverage to get everything tightened up. I think one of the downfalls to my build was my insistence upon using a bay reservoir. If I had used a cylindrical gravity-fed reservoir, that would have given me a lot more flexibility to mount it anywhere I could in my case. Also, if I had grown a third testicle and decided to water cool my GPUs, I could have flipped the 360mm radiator to the bottom and fed a reservoir over here, or even even the bay reservoir would have worked a lot better with the 360mm radiator facing the bottom. But the truth of the matter as to why I didn't water cool my GPUs was I wouldn't have gained a performance advantage. For those of you who aren't familiar with the 780 and the Titan, these are voltage locked boards. They're reference boards that I'm using, and they're very low power and low voltage locked, so I wouldn't have gained a performance advantage from water cooling them. Lower temperature wouldn't have helped with overclocking at all. Speaking of overclocking, for the past 5 hours I've been running Prime 95, and I've downclocked my CPU to 4.5 gigahertz. I did have it at 4.6, but that was before I overclocked my GPU, so the only way I could balance a CPU and a GPU overclock was by downclocking my CPU to 4.5. Voltage wise, I can't use offset. I've been having difficulties with using offset. I wanted to raise the V-core on my 4.6 megahertz overclock. I did update the BIOS of my motherboard. I'm using the X79 Deluxe, and on the 15th a BIOS revision 0403 came out. I updated it through ASUS Flashback, but that didn't really help with raising the V-core. The board won't go higher than well, for example, I wanted to set my V-core to 1.44, but the software on CPU-Z was reading 1.42. It wouldn't go higher than 1.42, even though I was asking the BIOS to give me 1.44. So I have been using a manual V-core instead of using offset. Regarding my overclock, I am very happy with where it's at in terms of speed and voltage. I think 1.41 V-core is a comfortable enough V-core for me to run 24/7, because for Sandy Bridge E, I remember the degradation point was 1.5. Speaking of Sandy Bridge E, the bottleneck for overclocking isn't temperature. The CPU will just get to a point where it'll plateau, so I think Ivy Bridge E is in the same vein. In terms of gaming performance, what games have I tried? I have tried Crysis 3 at 5760 by 1080 with FXAA, and I have tried Metro 2033 at 5760 by 1080. So synthetic CPU benchmarks mean nothing to me. The only thing I really care about is how well my games perform and how well I can render in Sony Vegas. One thing that I have wanted to do in Sony Vegas is up-render, so if I have a 1080p video, I want to render it at 1440p because YouTube now has a setting called Original. So it won't do very much to the video quality natively, but for whatever YouTube does when it compresses your video when you upload it, and well, YouTube processes your video, so the processing won't hit as hard. So original video quality, even though it is natively 1080, just upscaled to 1440p, should be at a better quality. Do you guys get what I'm saying, or I'm just talking in circles and rambling? So what was the point of all of this? If I had just used a Corsair H100i, I probably would have gotten a 4.3 gigahertz overclock in the best case scenario. So with this water cooling setup, I have a 4.5 gigahertz overclock, which is 200 megahertz extra. So what is that in terms of gaming performance? Almost nothing, probably like single digit frames. So what was the point of all of this? Well, first off, it was extremely fun. I had learned a lot. I ventured outside of my comfort zone, and I did have to get creative with my setup. If I just keep doing standard builds that I'm comfortable with and never leave my comfort zone, I'll never learn more about PC building. And I'm going to make an analogy with fitness. Muscles only grow when you stress them in ways that they haven't been stressed before. So the same thing applies with PC building. I had to venture out of my comfort zone and learn how to do new things. And yes, I did treat this as a learning experience. With the mistakes made with this build, it'll teach me more about what to do with my next water-cooled build, which won't probably be until, like, I don't know, if there are GPUs worth cooling the next generation, maybe I'll update my loop, but I'm going to leave everything as is right now. I am very satisfied with it. Is it the best? No, this is not the best. Is this the optimal orientation for everything? No, this is not optimal in the least bit. There are, like I mentioned previously, there are at least 10 things that I could have done differently. But was this a good learning experience for me? Yes. Was it stressful? Yes. But was it the good type of stressful? Yes, it was. So in summary, this was an extremely fun experience. I got everything ready before the Battlefield 4 beta. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for bearing with me through this build. My name is David, and I'll see you next video.